this session this afternoon, in which we're going to be hearing from two fascinating applications of complex systems ideas to evaluation. Just by way of a little bit of introduction, I was saying earlier, it felt a little bit like a reformation of a band, because I've actually chaired these two presentations at a previous forum for UNIDO. And I actually noticed that the work reasonably well, and I think what's really interesting and how it complements the discussions of this morning is that these are really both about practical applications. It's really about when the rubber hits the road and we want to try and engage with ideas of complexity at a methodological level. How do you do it? And that's what we have the advantage of hearing this afternoon. I do work on this issue more generally on the complexity, both in the context of strategy and the context of evaluation. So this session, I think, is of real relevance. And there's more and more of these sessions happening. And I guess one of my kind of big issues is that we need to find ways of connecting these conversations up across the silos within the sector. So it's not just about looking at complexity and evaluation. We need to start the discussions at the point of thinking about theories of change. We need an end-to-end appreciation of these issues. Otherwise, we simply won't be able to tackle the cognitive and operational biases that people observe in the sector. I think the two applications we've got here are interesting examples of doing exactly this, of questioning the assumptions behind the program, of trying to really get to grips with those assumptions, and then saying, how can new tools and how can new methods really help us understand, not avoid the complexity, but perhaps appreciate and navigate that complexity. So with no further ado, let me hand over to our first presenter, Aaron Zazueta. If you could just quickly introduce yourself, Aaron.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Aaron Zazueta. I am Chief Evaluator at the Global Environmental Facility. Let me just start and say that as it was well put, this is an application of complex systems theory to evaluation. I'm applying concepts, and it was very good that the previous sections came out, because I do not define concepts. I do not get into definitional issues, and that was very helpful. Although we did go through all of that through the evaluation, and we were thinking in terms of tipping points, path dependency, and all those things were in our mind. And I would sort of think that way. It's amazing. Our way of thinking changed to things that way. The other thing is that I am only taking one aspect of this evaluation, which is the application of complexity systems theory, not the whole evaluation. There were many issues, and that I will not be touching upon just for the sake of making it useful. So basically, why complexity? Why complexity? Basically, the South China Sea. We were tasked with evaluating the GF support in the South China Sea. Basically, the South China Sea meets all of the characteristics of socio-ecological systems, and that tells you where we're falling within the complexity theory spectrum of positions. Basically, this is a work done by Ostrom and her colleagues. But basically the key point is that we assume complexity theory as a framework to start asking our evaluative questions, because this is a naturally complex system, basically. And to do otherwise would be very difficult. Just let me give a very brief background. GF has been supporting activities in the South China Sea for 20 years. Or this evaluation covered 20 years of support of GF. To 7 countries in the form of 34 projects and some small grants. The total amount of money we were able to count was $150 million. The South China Sea is the biggest body of water in the world besides the oceans. It's a very conflicting area. You must be aware now of problems between China and Philippines, and China and Vietnam. So this is all part of the scenario and things that we have to deal with. Basically, what makes complex the situation? One is that you have among GF, there were many actors before GF interventions there trying to address the type of issues that GF addressed, and many actors after as well. And they all interact one another. So here's again, we talked earlier about context. Looking at context was very important, and we spent a lot of time not just looking what GF is doing, but what was happening around before and after GF. So basically you have multiple actors, but also you have multiple scales. We are dealing with a problem that has expressions at different scales, and those scales overlap and intersect with one another. We have on one hand administrative scales, which are human sort of governance and human management skills, and on the other hand we have the natural system that has different scales, and those do not match, and that is another source of complexity. There are feedback loops in the whole process. Basically, have to attend with, and most importantly, there are delays in the system response that are very unpredictable. We don't know. You do something now, you don't know when the system will respond or how the system would respond. So, but even then, we have to basically evaluate to what extent is GF moving the process or making contributions towards the sound management of the South China Sea. So basically, this poses some methodological challenges that we basically, over time, we develop an approach, and this sort of emerged, the approach emerged during the evaluation. And this approach basically, we've termed it basically a generic theory of change framework. And please notice, we're calling it a framework, not a theory of change. This is a framework by which we now do theory of change analysis in the GF. In fact, we're now applying it to all the portfolio and all of our evaluations. This is being mainstream in the GF actually as a way of doing a theory of change analysis. Basically, on one hand, what we did is we identified what are the areas of contribution of the GF. What is the GF contributing to concretely? What are the, not just outcomes, but we had an impact view on this. It was basically, what are the contributions of GF to progress towards impacting at the end of the projects? And we made a classification. Basically, this is a taxonomy that has three main components, three main areas. One, it has to do with knowledge and information. The other one with institutional capacity, and the other one what we call implementation strategies, which is basically the ways you go about actually testing approaches that actually address specific environmental problems or social issues, etc. Now, our objective has been, given that the Global Environmental Facility has as a mandate support countries to address, to meet their commitment towards environmental conventions. And basically, this is translated into global environmental benefits in the context of the country's sustainable development priorities. But global environmental benefits becomes the key. So this is about changes in the environmental status and reduction of stress, environmental stress, basically. But the key question is, how do we get there? I mean, on one hand, GEF is doing these things, and there's a time response issue, the time the system's delayed, so we have to deal with that. So we actually came up with basically identified two big channels through which what we would say the transformational process takes place. And one we call, I mean, these are sort of terminology that the first one we sort of created it. We sort of went back and forth what would be the best way, but what we call this broader adoption of the type of interventions that GF was supporting, or the type of results of interventions that GF was supporting, the solutions that GF was providing, and of others as well, and behavioral changes as well. That some of them would just take place out of the actual interventions. For example, knowledge and information would sometimes lead to behavioral changes, more difficult to trace, but it would. And we found some mechanisms through which this took place. Basically, these are things, again, very familiar to evaluators. We're talking about mainstreaming, replication, scaling up, market transformation. And again, we're trying to use the normal tools, normal concepts that evaluators use while doing evaluations as we get closer to the actual work that we do to address the questions. And what we have basically here is, let's go back to our problems, our methodological challenges, multiple actors and multiple scales. These four bubbles, three bubbles, excuse me, sub-bubbles, are systems as such that take place at different scales, and we trace them as such. We also have feedback systems that are taking place that we have to consider, and we have this issue of time delay. So that tells you more or less where are areas of inquiry while trying to address these characteristics and these methodological challenges. And we also basically, transfer this into key questions. What is the role of GEF? What is the catalytic effect of GEF? And what is the impact of GEF's work? So those were the three main questions of the evaluation that we sort of drove the evaluation. Now, in terms of up to now, you see the link between complexity in terms of how we articulated questions, and in such a way that we could use pretty standard evaluative tools. Basically, we did not have to go through other ones, although we did use some of the more esoteric instruments as well, and I'll go into that. So we had a second question, the impact, and the third question, how does GEF catalyze change in the region? So let me just say that when we talk about the more concrete challenge that we're facing here is that there are too many actors and confounding factors to really talk about what is the impact of GEF as such, or how is GEF moving the process forward. So we took some of the premises of the socioecological systems analysis, and basically this is work that had been done by Ostrom and her colleagues, and there's a lot of data backing it up. There are thousands of cases that they've looked at basically. So what we did basically is we look at science, the state of science, and what is science telling us about these processes? What is it that is at work? What is it that if we want to transform the system to move in one direction, what should be happening? To answer these questions, we basically used historical analysis, social network analysis. This is a visualization which is associated with complexity systems. Analysis of global databases to look at big data, big trends. Comparison with other regions. We took other regions and we were trying to understand what was happening in other regions, other interventions that are of a comparable scale or similar. And of course, we talked to a lot of people here. And there's a lot of field work involved here. A lot of we visited many sites, and besides the actual work. Now, what we found basically is that GEF is the largest founder by far in the region. If you look at we look at all the databases of giving for regional, marine, and coastal issues. Okay, and I emphasize the regional part because there were many others and more giving for national. There were many donors giving for national issues, but regional issues, GEF really. And if we look at the seas of East Asia, GEF is more than any of them, and for the South China Sea, by far the biggest. The second thing we found out is that by doing a network analysis of a situation with GEF support in a hypothetical without GEF support, we found out that indeed GEF had helped. It allowed new actors to come into the area, number one, and it had helped existing actors to expand their reach in the network of key actors and agencies in the region. I won't go through the numbers, but the other thing that we noticed is that many of the actors working at a national level were able to be part of our broader regional initiative in account of GEF's engagement as the main and pretty much only regional major actor in the area. Now you can look here at the network. This is a network with GEF support. This is a network without GEF support. You see that there's some isolated elements, and you see also. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me go back. You see also that the network. This network is more centralized, more compact than this other one. So basically, this again is using complex instruments. Basically, this visualization. But it gives us an idea again of what is the likely GEF support. So basically, what we're finding is that GEF is facilitating this interaction between the different actors. Is facilitating trust and communication. Is sort of lubricating the communication process in the region. And according to Ostrom and her colleagues, that is critical to get cooperative behavior in polycentric systems where there's no structure no top-down governance structure basically. So the other thing is let me say that indeed there is this sense of and when talking to the different actors of the role that GEF was playing and the role that these mechanisms are playing. So this is triangulated with direct conversations, not just with the network. The network allows us to quantify to what extent this was happening, the network analysis. But on the other hand, this is not just about getting people to talk, but we started actually seeing instances of cooperative arrangements between the countries that there weren't before, say, between a cooperation between Cambodia and Vietnam to manage shared seagrass beds. I mean, this is Cambodia and Vietnam. If you know what the history about Cambodia and Vietnam over the last 30 years, 30 years, maybe 300 years, this is quite interesting actually that this type of cooperation is happening. And we have other examples here that I won't step on. But indeed, the actual cooperative behaviors. Oops, I have to hurry up. Behavior is taking place. GF initiatives helps move actors and link initiatives at different scales. Basically, at the national level, a lot of work in doing the national frameworks for environmental management. At the local level, basically, a lot of work in testing specific approaches and technologies. A lot of emphasis, again, in looking at the context, in looking at specifically at the processes of the global conventions and the homegrown process of decentralization in Southeast Asia. These were two important drivers that have to be taken into account to understand why GF was able to support the process. And it wasn't about GF, but there was a context, some contextual factors that were very much at play. And of course, many other donors and many other actors, existing governments, etc. Now, at the regional level, let me tell you that it's great that the GF is providing so much support, but countries are still very dependent on foreign assistance to deal with the regional services. And that's an area of concern of GF, because when we talk about they're depending on regional foreign assistance, that means GEF, and that there's a serious issue with regards to sustainability. So suddenly, all this good thing turns a question mark. You know, we turn it around and say, well, you know, GF, be careful. Now, when we talk about at the local level, we want to deal with and we're dealing with impact. We try to see, okay, what is the impact of GF? We found that there was almost no monitoring data on stress reduction and environmental impact. There were some cases, so we had to basically find ways of discounting rival hypotheses. And we use several tools. I will go quickly now, but we did it basically. When there was no data, we were able to go and commission remote sensing analysis before, and during, and after GEF in several areas. What we found basically is that even though and of course we did field work as well to establish the causal links that indeed GF support was related to this type of changes. but we also look at regional trends. We found out that in all cases, regional trends were going, macros were going down. In all of the cases where GF support was taking place, we saw some improvement or maintenance of status quo. Now let me tell you, GF did not start these processes. GF was sort of supported processes that had been started at the beginning. So here, this is an issue of GF contributing to a set of actions that have a history. But indeed, being a contribution that is quite important, but this is not fully attributable to the GF. Here you see, we did look at cases of stress reduction, another habitats, but I won't get into it, but we did both anecdotal and quantitative stress reduction data. We did find it for 26 cases, so out of 42 cases, we found it only for 26, but we used that information. Now, we found that indeed environmental stress reduction is occurring at the local scale. So we conclude that GF approaches do work. But is this resolving the regional problem, the management of the South China Sea? No, the drivers are a much larger scale, and these drivers need to be addressed for the actual problem to be basically solved. So how does transformational change take place? Are these drivers being addressed at the larger scale? Basically, there's a problem of nonlinearity that we're facing here in complex systems. There's no predictability, but once things take place, you can look back and explain, as we said earlier. But also, if we use big data, a lot of data, then patterns start to be formed, and the boundaries of what is predictable and now changes. Someone mentioned this earlier on during the day. So we used all these concepts basically to move on the evaluation. We used several techniques, but again, we measured replication, we measured mainstreaming, we measured scaling up. Basically, these are the instances in 42 cases where we see the different mechanisms at play, and each one is documented. Each one we can tell you what each one happened. What was happening in each place. And at the site level, basically, we find that not all sites were the same, basically. Someone mentioned about Paulson and the issue of context. If the conditions are not there, basically, broader adoption will not take place. And we basically have cases where indeed the conditions are there, and where the conditions are not there, it's a negative positive. I mean, this is there are only 4 cases, but it's very clearly, the lines are very clear, We have more cases, but this one is where it becomes more clear. At the highest level, basically, we find that there's GF mainstream is taking place through the participation in the GF in the mechanisms that GF is supporting of the countries. This is countries participating, making plans, following on plans. At the provincial levels, laws are being adopted that were initiated by GF demonstrations, and there's a movement towards implementation of regionally agreed priorities. There's still a lot of work to do. Okay, this is the starting of a process, but GF is about global environmental benefits. GF is about global commons. Basically, where is GF support taking place? Where are the activities? If you look at this graph, towards this corner, basically what you get is a need of not too much intergovernmental cooperation. This has to do about a problem being a problem crossing boundaries, say pollution moving from one country to another. What we have found is that most of GF support is down here. Basically, GF has a challenge. This is good. These are still transboundary issues, but the real commons, there's still an issue with getting countries to work at the real commons, and there's a need, if you are going to have impact on the South China Sea, the key problems in the South China Sea, you have to keep moving upwards. Staying in that area is not sufficient. So basically, the GF is it's catalyzing support, but global environmental benefits can only be achieved if the conditions are there. Be careful not to push when the conditions are not there. GF is trying to make some of those conditions, but there are much larger drivers that GF will not be able to to change, and that is just a reality. And need to address the comments as well. Now, I'm coming towards the end now. Basically, GF support on international waters basically links different actors and initiatives across the system. It supports initiatives that have resulted in environmental stress at the local scale. Broader adoption is taking place, but drivers are still very strong and would need to be addressed. And more initiatives on addressing regional environmental comments are key. Now, let me just say on the issue of applying complexity, this is, as you can see, a very large-scale evaluation. This is a comprehensive evaluation. It took several years to do. No less than 20 people, multidisciplinary group, top scientists. I got top scientists to help. And worked at all levels. We visited 42 sites, had interviews, had surveys, etc., etc. Basically what we've done here is we've used complexity theory to frame our questions, to identify our research problems, to identify what is the nature of the system that we're dealing with and what type of issues should be evaluated, under what criteria should GF be evaluated. This was very important. Secondly, due to our recommendation is due to the time people have talked about the problem of knowledge and the technical expertise to using these tools. Be very careful, very judicious in the use of complexity tools, modeling, and that kind of stuff. Your point is very well taken. We are using modeling for other parts of our portfolio, using this type of framework, but it's taking a lot of trial and error, and we're learning how to use it as well. It's key to use different methods. It's key to basically it's key to triangulate. Oops. Triangulation is key in this process. You have to use different methods. You have to do it from different points of view, and context is again critical. You cannot just look at the agency you're working at. Half of our time was dedicated looking at context, half of the time was looking at internally GF activities. And we have found that scientific theory and knowledge is also very important. In fact, we are now using science as a starting point to assessing, developing hypotheses for our and questions for our impact evaluations. And we look for the top scientists of the area, and we get their support to say, okay, what do you know about this system? How does this system work? What should we be measuring? And it's really it's sort of the beginning of a journey at this point.
Great. Thank you. Without any further ado, I'm just going to hand straight over to Peter, who will present on exploring the potential of systems dynamics modeling. In a very different context. I think this is industrial upgrading in Ethiopia.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Peter Loewe. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Just as you have asked to give a bit of a background information, my background is engineering, so this explains perhaps my bias for system dynamics, because engineers do like system dynamics. Then I went on to GTZ. So I had quite an exposure to GTZs, or now GIZs, early days of GOP planning workshops, where of these ideas of bringing different stakeholders, build consensus, using the problem trees and log frames as a kind of a meta language, which was 30 years ago already something around, and which unfortunately, for me at least, has disappeared a little bit from the scene. And then I went to the European Commission, and the European Commission, I was particularly in the innovation department. I don't know whether you are aware of the innovation systems debate and the innovation systems literature which is around. I think innovations has been one of the areas where the systems thinking has been applied most widely and most thoroughly, and all this concept of path dependency, which we heard this morning, is coming from this system noise, which has been used very widely in the innovation systems research. So that was my second big kind of contact with systems dynamics. And then comes the third part of my professional career, which was with UNIDO. And this was then another opportunity for me. That's okay. Good, thank you. Another opportunity for me to test this approach on the projects which we have been evaluating there. I was a member of the evaluation group, which ended just a couple of weeks ago. I have retired from UNIDO just 3 weeks ago. So I'm no more UNIDO, but I'm bringing to you an experience which we have had in UNIDO, an experiment, I should say. It's much different from what you just presented, because it's much more modest in its scale, and it's not really an evaluation. It is just what we tried to understand is whether the system dynamics modeling would bring advantages as compared to the very standard way of linear causal modeling and log frame thinking, which we all know. This is actually what we tried to find out, and which we have tested with one particular case. So that is the content of my presentation. I will, of course, develop this around the issue of the private sector development, or enterprise development, or industrial development, which has been, as I explained, my background for many years. I will then move on into this specific UNIDO demonstration tool. It's really a testing tool, and show you two simulations, which I cannot show. I mean, with the software which we have been using, because this would need some technical rearrangements. But if somebody is interested in a really nitty-gritty demonstration of the tool, I have it on my own computer, and we could look at it. So here we have a causal chain model, which perhaps some of you might even know. It comes from the website of the OAC Donor Committee for Enterprise Development. It is a causal, that's the official name of it, a causal chain model of PSD poverty impact. What you can see, whatever we do at the top is people get jobs and earn more. Yeah, it's really like I mean, many philosophers have been quoted today. I would quote Leibniz. Here is the best of all worlds, and there's no negative effects. There is no assumptions in it. It is just as if business environment reform and public-private partnerships must end with people being better off. Which, of course, as we all know, is not true. We know it from the 19th century, but from the Luddites, and we know it from the 21st century, that all these interventions, of course, can lead to this impact, which we all want, but they do not necessarily lead to that impact. There's a lot, hundreds of hypotheses built into that in an intransparent way. Of course, that is not a reason to totally abandon this linear modeling and causal chain modeling. So what we try to do in UNIDO, we try to look, I mean, to kind of scrutinize that, and still using the causal chain model, this time going from the left to the right, but it's the same thinking. So you have it on your on the paper, perhaps you can't read it, but the thing is here that we have tried to understand and to differentiate between different paths here. Not only one path, but for instance, what we have called here the low road and the high road of innovation. This is also a concept coming from the innovation theory, that innovation can lead to a job-intensive road and can also lead to a more investment strategy, which is investing into rationalization and actually into things like jobless growth, or even crowding out less competitive SMEs by your intervention. There are many ways how an interventionist, a traditional kind of UNIDO or World Bank intervention or PSD intervention, can lead to more poverty actually. Maybe in the short term, so we're coming here to an important point which has been mentioned several times. There are short-term loops and long-term loops. So there may be, and that is very important to understand, that in the short term we may create adverse effects, which perhaps in the longer term under certain conditions may be overcome. So the long-term and short-term connections, which cannot be shown in such traditional causal chain model, can be modeled in a system dynamics loop model. And this is why we thought perhaps we should make a further step from this very simplistic thing which I saw in my first slide through the more sophisticated but still causal chain model towards a system dynamics model. I don't need to mention that in detail because it has been mentioned many times already this morning. System dynamics means loops instead of chains. It means two types of loops: negative feedback and positive feedback. The positive feedback leading to exponential growth, and the negative feedback loops leading to something like an equilibrium or goal seeking. Interconnections, strong weak couplings, and of course we have to bear in mind that there can be stocks and flows, which leads to these instabilities in system and kind of fluctuations. And at the end, this type of thinking is able to explain nonlinear behavior, why small causes can lead to big effects, which is of course also something which you cannot model and demonstrate in a linear causal chain model. So there are many advantages why we think one should try it. Just as an illustration, I mentioned investment strategies. Of course, it is different if a company invests into expansion, expanding its production. This would be a case where you're heading towards an equilibrium of price and demand and production, or whether it invests into rationalization in the sense of laying off labor and making processes more capital intensive, which is more of a positive feedback, because if you embark on that, there is no stabilization goal seeking, but it is rather exponential spinning off process. And you can, of course, a third example, invest into innovation, which is yet a different investment strategy, which would be more of the high road type of investment strategy which I mentioned at the beginning. So in all of these cases, one would, if you do it in a group, one would have to discuss under which condition this is a positive feedback or a negative feedback, and by simply discussing these feedback loops, we have made the experience that many of the tacit assumptions that colleagues might have become transparent. And it's type of assumptions which you would not be able to bring to the surface with a simple linear causal model. Now, the red entry point here, this is of course where then the intervention strategies or the development interventions would come into the picture. And you can start demonstrating where in these systems you would, with which kind of intervention, more or less traditional interventions, which UNIDO is used to with other development organizations, you can model where the entry points are and what is actually the chance, of course, that you would perhaps arrive at this ideal situation where with a little input you would have a big result. I don't think I have to go to that. I think on system dynamics many things have been said, and you are all specialists, or at least this is too much trivial to be presented. If anybody is interested in the whole scope of system dynamics at the current moment, go on the website of the World Systems Dynamics Society. They have two conferences, one conference per year, and you would see a tremendous richness of applications of systems theory, systems dynamics simply on that website. It's very open and transparent and structured. Now, before I present the UNIDO model, just make it very clear for us the process, and I'm just taking a quote from Forrester. John Forrester was one of the ancestors of system dynamics. He is making the point that the process of modeling is really what is interesting, much more than the final product of the model itself. And I would go one step further. The process of building the model is interesting because you bring up you make assumptions explicit and build consensus, but then the simulation of it, using it, playing with it, using it as a game tool, in the gaming mode, then you have the second round of consensus building, because the group would then start gaming with the model and would discuss the results, whether they're intuitive or unintuitive. So the point is not the model, but the process of building it and the process of using it. The UNIDO model itself. So it built on a concrete case, a leather project in Ethiopia. I should have mentioned it at the beginning, but I do mention it here now. Of course, this project was not I didn't do it alone. I worked with a very experienced programmer from the University of Bergen, Sebastian Derwisch, and a consultant from Austria. Sebastian has now finished his PhD in system dynamics, and he has been the one who has been the programmer of the whole thing. So many credits go to him. The model has 200 internal variables, which is a lot. It has 3 external factors. It has 8 input variables, and it has 11 output variables. Yeah. So the structure is here, perhaps, as I'm already getting my, not the red, but the yellow sign. I'm moving on. The structure of the model is, of course, much too complicated to explain it here. And this may be one of the criticisms, that you get easily into rather complicated models which are not as transparent as you would like them to be, but perhaps this is the price to pay for more complexity. This is, I think, really a discussion we should have. 3 external factors. We can change import tariffs, cost of raw materials, and increased competition of export markets. We have 8 interventions, things like investment, of course. Investment can be in equipment or can be in skills, in training. We can change labor intensity, more labor intensive or less labor intensive investment strategies. We have very much insisted that we would like the model to show not only export. I mean, UNIDO project, as many others, tend to be built on the underlying hypothesis that all developing countries must export export into developed countries. But what we have found, and here we have innovation findings from our Ethiopia evaluation built into the model, saying that we must show also that the local market in Ethiopia, quite a substantial big market, can help companies to become competitive for the international market. So you must model both the local and international market. And in terms of interventions, it means you should have a buy local campaign, or you should have an intervention parameter which helps you to model this internal market dimension. The effects are here. You can show the equipment, which means is investment into capital investment in skills, productivity, costs, price, local and international demands are output variables, and of course the number of jobs and the wages, because as I said, we are interested in poverty impact, and that's what we of course try to have built into the model. Now, 2 simulations. Please give me 4 minutes for that. The first simulation is a simulation where we don't intervene. It's just that one of the external factors is changing, and we have here the kind of trade liberalization or that increase of imports. Tariffs are tiered down, imports are increased, and we model that in 2011, between 2011 and 14. And what you actually do in the tool, this is a slider, and you move that virtual slider on your screen, and you decide, okay, in 2000 you have one go for 2011, and you would say, okay, I move it to 0.2, and then so you can try to simulate this increase of imports over time between 2010 and 2014, and you do it with this slider. The result at the output level is that you can see these changes. This is what the model then produces. Of course, it would produce that local demand goes down because there's a lot of imports. 1 year later, production goes down because there's a slight time delay between demand and production. Costs go up, price goes down, more competition. Equipment, after time, goes down because companies would de-invest. They would not invest into skills anymore, so quality goes down, jobs goes down, and this is the situation. Very important to see here, international demand, no changes, because we have built in to the model the evaluation finding that companies need to have a better, need to have a certain infrastructure in order to use the export opportunities. So being exposed to more imports is one thing, but being able to use the export opportunities requires that certain interventions are done. And this is now precisely what I will show you in the second simulation, which is the response, a simulation of a response strategy to this external shock or external change. What you can see here is that this is an over time pattern of a response which we have found through interactive gaming. It's not the only one, it's one of 1 million different response strategies which you could simulate with this tool, or more of 1 million. You can, it's a virtually infinite number of intervention strategies. You can combine the different parameters and change them over time. So certain things you should do at the very beginning, whereas other things you should do only towards the end of the time period 2010-2035. And that is what you can change and what we have done in the group and discussed with what should you begin with, what are the more long-term interventions that require a longer lead time. So at the end, the way you do it is, of course, you have it 2 minutes, yes? 2 minutes is promised. The way you do it is you look at, you do some changes in 2010, and then the system would show you a certain response, and depending on the response, you change your intervention for 2011, and this is an iterative process. For every year you would change the parameters, and at the end come to a supposedly optimal, where you could see that indeed after a certain number of years international demand is picking up, and from this as a condition many things in the system change, because from here on companies are able to use the opportunities of the liberalization, and that changes the whole picture. And wages are also then able to pick up and increase. Of course, this is all hypothetical behavior of the system, but it's a behavior which is kind of the result of a group work, which is then coming back to the old GOP workshops. The hypothesis of having all the stakeholders, the different views and viewpoints present in your group, this is, you can't get away from that with using system dynamics, but it is rather the opposite. The system dynamics tool used in such a way would help you to make all the assumptions much more transparent and accompany such a stakeholder discussion and consensus building process in a more transparent way. That's what I wanted to bring. Thank you.
We've got some very specific instructions for what we do now. We're not going to be stopping for questions. We're going to go straight into group work. But I thought before we do that, I just thought it might be useful for me to draw out what I thought were some of the common points from those two very useful presentations. And I think there were 4 or 5 key things that ran across, although they were very different in their applications. The first was they were both grounded in a real need to understand the problem, whether it was looking at the South Sea environmental issues, South China Sea environmental issues, or looking at industrial upgrading. That they really tried to understand the problem in the round and appreciate the nuances and the kind of intricacies of those problems. And part of the way of embracing that problem was to ground both case studies in science, in theory, whether it was ecological theory, biological theory, social or economic theory. And therefore there was a need for both scientific knowledge, expertise, but also technical knowledge in terms of people that use particular tools and approaches. And I think both of those are pretty standard for any kind of research project. I think the next thing has really come through to questions about evaluations and how we need to be thinking about evaluations. I think both of them had to quite carefully set the level of zoom, if you like, for the intervention. What is in, what is out, and why? And they had to make those decisions at quite a strategic level because of the cost involved in including everything. In neither case were they able to boil the ocean without mixing my metaphors too much. But I think as well as setting the level of zoom, I think there was a social dimension in terms of bringing different actors together, bringing those different perspectives together. We heard about the need for a multidisciplinary team from Aaron, and the need for to use gaming, to use simulations, to get the whole system in the room from Peter. And one of the things I liked was the idea of using complex systems thinking strategic. That it wasn't necessarily about all or nothing. It was saying that there are some methodological improvements. It can help us make sense of things. It can help surface assumptions. It can help guide our philosophies. I guess in many ways, speaking to the points that Elliot made earlier on, that complexity can be about methods. It can be about a toolkit. It can be about a way of positioning evaluation. It can also be about our philosophy and our values, and I think we saw all of those there. I guess the final thing is really about the price of complexity. If you're going to engage, and I think that was really clear of both these things, if you want to engage with this, make sure you've got the resources and you've got the time and the money to do it. If you haven't, it may be better to stick to your log books. So